Chapter 21. Documents of the Era, 1890s. Wet, behind the ears. Inexperienced and young, the lad was wet behind the ears. The next 2 decades following the Gilded Age are called the Progressive Age. Some date this era starting in 1896 and ending in 1916. The Progressive Age is a period of widespread social activism and political reform after years of corruption, monopoly, and waste. The gross wealth of a few and the multitudes of poor people led investigative journalists known as muckrakers in the early 1900s. This helped bring regulations and changes to promote a middle class of workers. The newspaper educated the masses of what was uncovered and what was happening abroad, but news traveled slow to reach the rural hills of the Ozarks. The boom in newspapers in the 1880s and 1890s grew to about 13,000 individual papers. Incredibly, that number is about the same today in 2022 as newspapers struggle to stay in business. The few newspapers in Arkansas that existed before the Civil War shut down and very gradually returned afterwards. While local Ozark papers were mostly news about the community, sometimes they had stories they borrowed from larger papers from the city. The telegraph and trains brought news from afar, and that was then published. Often, the stories were weeks and months old by the time folks could read them. Before the war, probably the nearest accessible newspaper to Searcy Countyans was from Batesville. Batesville News began 1843. Goods moved along the military road from there to Yellville and then south into Searcy County. After the war, some Arkansas papers used the word Democrat in their title as a support of the Southern sympathizers, with fewer using the word Republican in their title as Northern sympathizers. Here are some of the early papers of the area from 1871 through 1890. Boone County Record, Bellefonte, began 1871. Highlander, Harrison, 1873. Times, 1876. Boone Banner, 1885. Russellville Democrat, began 1875. Jasper American, 1884. Arkansas Wheel, Jasper, 1886. Mountain Echo, Yellville, began 1886. Rector Vitascope began 1895. Mountain Educator, Marshall, began 1889. Green Forest Tribune began 1890. Many small newspapers started up and disappeared in the early 20th century. Old newspapers became the journals of yesterday for future generations to research and know some of the forgotten history of America. The value of printed material is inestimable to all, the Holy Bible being the paramount example. History is blotted out if it's not written and kept. Today we have the amazing storage and recall capacity of digital data, but it's very fragile and could be easily obliterated or inaccessible, much more than a hard copy. Amazingly ancient cultures relied on oral history, and some of it has endured to this very day. God gives to some the gift of being historians, and they help to keep the past alive. The end of the 1890s brought a generation of harnesses that my generation would remember before their earthly journey was completed. The following 6 children were born to Billy Harness and alive during the Progressive Age, 1896-1916. Married to his second wife, Katie Flatt, I have listed their ages in the year ending in 1900. Tennessee Victoria, 16 years hours. Nora Bell, 12. Yahoras. Elizabeth Jane, 07. Wars. Arizona. Uroix. Wars. James Riley, 03, Yost, America, 00, Martha O. B., 1905. Most of Billy Harness's children were born on Bear Creek. His infant son, W.A. Harness III, was buried at Whit's Spring Cemetery in 1893 and not at Bear Creek. His next child, Elizabeth, has an unlisted birthplace. The next daughter, Arizona, is listed as being born in Whit's Springs in 1894. But his son, James Riley's place of birth is Bear Creek in 1897. Then his daughter, America, has Whit's Spring listed as her birthplace. Billy and Katie Harness married in 1891 and buried a son, W.A. Harness III, at Whit's Springs in 1893. It is probable that they were living at Whit early in their marriage, then bought a farm south of Whit where a new schoolhouse was located. The following note is written on the envelope containing the deed for this property by J.R. Harness as follows. The deed from Mr. Morgan and wife to the school district. Mt. Pleasant, 3 miles. So of Whit's Springs, part of the old W.A. Harness place, deeded in 1895, 2 years before I was born. We moved there when I was 5 months old. Land described east 1-2 of the SW-14, the W-12 of SE 104 of Section 30, 79 acres, in Township 13, north of Range 17, west of the 5th Principal Meridian in Arkansas. A patent for 160 acres was given to Henry Morgan on December 17, 1894. Then a deed was given for a schoolhouse 5 months later, and the land was sold to Billy and Katie in a couple of years. The original land survey of the county was completed in 1838. The land donated to School District 69, Met Pleasant, was for school purposes and made on May 15, 1895. The size was 10 rods, 165 feet, by 16 rods, 264 feet, which is an exact 1 acre. Mary Morgan, the wife of Henry Morgan, signed the deed using an X next to her written name, which indicated she could not write her name. Author has the deed. James Riley Harness was born in March of 1897, and the family, 5 children, moved there in August of 1897. The house of Billy and Katie Harness overlooked the farm below and was near a hillside spring. The location was shown to me and others of my family by Coy Taylor, son of America Harness Taylor, in the summer of 2021. The schoolhouse was located about 200 yards from where the Harnesses lived. The school was named Mont Pleasant, Norrell 69, but according to Carl Taylor, father to Coy Taylor, the locals called it the Harness School. A school roster shows that James Riley Harness and Richard Ruff, author's grandfathers, were among students in attendance. Billy Harness paid taxes in 1896. I have actual tax receipts starting in 1896 for 70 acres at a cost of $422, prorated first year. The following year of 1897, Billy paid taxes on 159 acres, which is the total tract of land owned previously by Henry Morgan after donating 1 acre to the school. In addition, Billy paid taxes on 70 acres on the Bear Creek Farm. He continued to pay taxes on 229 acres, 2 farms, in 1898, 1899, 1903, 1904, and 1908. He was being assessed for School District 69, Mint Pleasant, and School District 14, Bear Creek, per 1904 taxes. In 1908, property was assessed for School District 69 only. Jane Harness paid taxes on School District 14 in the amount of $2.45 based on 40 acres in 1905 and 1906. That is part of the property Billy had been paying real estate taxes on. Jane Harness, Jenny, acquired 40 acres in February of 1901 on Bear Creek, according to land records. Once WSW 5th PM No 14N 17W34. I'm speculating that Jenny had owned the Creek Farm for maybe upward of 20 years before Billy started paying taxes on it. Perhaps her son Martin Harness had moved on, and Jenny looked to Billy to help with the farm. In 1910, Billy Harness paid taxes on 229 acres, which he had paid since 1898. However, he then paid taxes on an additional 44 adjoining acres near his Witt farm and 59 acres adjoining his Creek farm, for a total of 332 acres totaling $21.02. Billy paid for those again in 1913, but in 1914 added another 40 acres adjoining his Creek farm, totaling $28.25. Then in 1916, he was back to 332 acres of taxable land, and the same in 1918. He probably decided to let the extra land go back for its taxes, which was commonly practiced at that time. Billy was still paying taxes on both farms as late as 1933, but on less land, 183 acres, and his son James Riley paid a portion of the taxes in 1931, 1933, and on all of them beginning in 1938, the year Billy died. Jenny paid District Number 14 school taxes in 1927 on 25 acres. The only tax records I have for her are school taxes. Why she only paid the school tax is a mystery, but poverty might have limited her ability, and others paid the real estate taxes. It might also have been her way of supporting her grandchildren's education. I have receipts showing Billy paid a poll tax from 1897 through 1934. Since the inception of the state of Arkansas in 1836, a poll tax was charged to anyone who wished to vote in a national election. The law continued until 1964, when the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution struck down any poll tax in a federal election. While the law discriminated against the poor, it did prove the seriousness of the voter and their plans to participate in an election. Like a licenses fee of today, it regulated and qualified you to participate and was predictive of the number of voters who would cast a vote. Women could not vote until the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted them the right in 1920. Reflection. The beginning of an era known as the Progressive Age slowly began changes that helped lift some out of poverty following the Civil War era. Jenny was praying for her children. Billy and Katie were feeding their family, and Riley was the only boy in a house of sisters. The Harness lineage hung by a single male heir in whose loins a clan was destined in the future. Many stories in the Bible tell of a similar beginning, where God spake of the future, God who quickeneth the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were. Romans 4:17.